Great. So welcome to this week's Torah portion, and it's called Behar, and it is in Leviticus 25 verse 1 to 26 verse 2. It's quite a short Torah portion. And the Haftorah is Jeremiah 32 verse 6 to 27, and in the Brit Hadashah, we read Luke 4 verse 16 to 21. So we're going to focus today on the cycles of 7. So if you've read through this Torah portion, I'm sure you would have seen there were many cycles of 7. And since we are in the time of counting the Omer as well, I'm sure many of you made that connection with the counting of the 7 weeks. And then the Feast of Shavuot, that's going to be in July. I believe it's the 12th of July. Freedom to those enslaved. So this was the whole idea behind the Shemitah and the Jubilee, is that there's in each one of those cycles, something is left to rest, something is redeemed, something is set free. And we're going to look at what does it mean to go back to the beginning, because God is all about redemption. And we know that it all went wrong in the garden. And I believe that God is busy working on his plan of redemption to get all of us back to that place where Adam and Eve was, with intimacy and walking with him every day. So a broad overview over this week's Torah portion, we'll see it begins with a Shabbat for the land, and it ends by God saying that we as people need to honor his weekly Shabbat. So we see a Shabbat for the land, the earth, and a Shabbat for the people. So what was interesting for me, I just made a little note in my Bible as I was reading it this week, was that there are 3 things that rest with the Shabbat. We've got the land that has its 7-year Sabbath, the 7 times 7 with the Jubilee, but also in the weekly Sabbath, the land rests because we're not working on that day. So if you were in the country of Israel and you owned a piece of land, you wouldn't be working the land on the weekly Shabbat. People rest, and animals. So animals would be your domestic animals that maybe work. Is domestic animals the right thing? Probably. You know, if you had an ox that had to pull something or carry something, or a donkey, that animal would rest as well. And then I asked myself, what do these 3 things have in common? And I found that 2 of these 3 come out of the earth. On day 6, we see that God calls forth the beasts of the field from the earth, and then he takes the dust of the earth and he creates people. So there's a connection between land, people, and animals. And these 3 things that we see also go into Sabbath rest. So we've got 2 types of Sabbaths that are basically focused on in this week's Torah portion. The first is the 7-year cycle. And it says in Leviticus 25 verse 2 to 5, tell the people of Israel, when you enter the land I am giving you, the land itself is to observe a Shabbat rest for Adonai. So I just want to stop here. Many people that go back to their Hebrew roots have this question of, okay, so do I also have to do this if I own land or property? And we clearly see that this is a commandment related to the land of Israel itself. So there's something really special about the country of Israel. God says he owns that property. We're going to see this later in this Torah portion, where he actually says, you think you're buying and selling this land, but I'm telling you, you really just sojourners in my land. I own this property. So there's something really special about this land of Israel. But in that is something spiritual that we are going to look at. We're going to see how do we apply this to our own lives as well. So this is a commandment specifically to those people when they enter the land that God is giving them. So that is the promised land. So 6 years you are to sow your field. 6 years you will prune your grapevines and gather their produce. But in the 7th year is to be a Shabbat of complete rest for the land, a Shabbat for Adonai. You will neither sow your field nor prune your grapevines. You are not to harvest what grows by itself from the seeds left by your previous harvest, and you are not to gather the grapes of your untended vine. It is to be a year of complete rest for the land. So what that means is that you're not physically going to work. You're not going to eat and till the ground, and there's going to be hard work by the sweat of your brow. That was the curse that came. I don't know if you ever saw that. You know, many people think that Adam was cursed, but actually the ground was cursed because of Adam. That's what the word says. The ground is cursed on account of Adam. And then God says to Adam, and now you will eat and work hard, and you will earn your living by the sweat of your brow. So we see in this year, there's a rest. There's a rest for the land and there's a rest for Adam, for the people, for us. And you are not going to harvest. So you're not physically going to plant and you're not going to harvest it. But anything that grows, you can pick that day, you can take it off the land and you can eat it. And anyone can eat from your land. So you're not supposed to go and gather, even though you didn't sow anything, and accumulate for yourself and sell it. But you can live off the land. So that's the principle here. Then the second Sabbath that we see in this week's Torah portion is in verse 8 to 10 of Leviticus 25. You are to count 7 Sabbaths of years, 7 times 7 years. That is 49 years. Then on the 10th day of the 7th month, on Yom Kippur, you are to sound the blast on the shofar. You are to sound the shofar all through your land, and you are to consecrate the 50th year, proclaiming freedom throughout the land to all its inhabitants. It will be a Yovel for you. You will return everyone to the land he owns, and everyone is to return to his family. So this is the portion where we actually find that 2 New Year's cycles that we have on the Jewish calendar. That's sometimes very confusing for people, because we have the kind of religious New Year, and I hate using the word religious, but I can't think of a better word, that starts with the Pesach, and it's the beginning of the feast and the beginning of months. But we see from this chapter that when we count years, we count it from Yom Kippur. And that's related to Yom Teruah, the sounding of the shofar. And that's where the civil New Year starts. So if you're going to give back someone's land that you bought because maybe they were in debt, you're going to count the years from the civil New Year, not from that religious New Year date. Okay, so that's just something else that's really interesting about the Hebrew mindset. And remember, we all think we want to start at one end and finish at another end, but that's very Greek-minded. The Hebrew mindset works in cycles and in circles, and it just comes around and goes around all the time. Okay, so we see in this, there's a principle of returning what belongs to you through your bloodline. That is your inheritance. And what happened during the time, this time with the Israelites, is that if someone fell into debt, they could sell themselves or they could sell their property. And then they kind of worked off the debt through working in labor as a servant to one of their fellow kinsmen, or by selling a part of their inheritance. But God's heart is that you don't ever lose your inheritance, that which he has given and allocated to a certain family, it has to stay in that family, so that one family doesn't get really poor and another family gets really rich off the misfortune of someone else. So even the word slave that we sometimes see in the Torah, it's not the slavery, the perverted sick slavery that we all think of when we think of what happens to many of the people that lived in Africa. That's never God's plan. In fact, God hates it. He says if you kidnap someone, the punishment for that is capital punishment. You need to be killed. And that's what happened to those people. They were kidnapped and sold as if they were not people. The slaves that we read about in the Torah is really what we are actually all doing today, right? You go and work for someone, they pay you a salary, and you pay your debt at the end of the month with that salary. Hopefully, we're all working really hard at getting out of debt, right? Otherwise, you're a slave to the system. But that, I just wanted to give some context, how it would happen that you would sell yourself as a slave, or that you would sell your inheritance. And this is what we see is being redeemed with this Yovel year in the 50th year. So God clearly says that when you sell it, you need to keep a right of redemption. And in Psalm 115, verse 16, we see that the heavens are the Lord's heavens, but the earth he has given to the children of man. That means it's our inheritance. He created the earth for us. Man has dominion over the earth. That means God gave us the title deed to the earth. And we find some references to that in Psalm 8, verse 4 to 8, and Genesis 1, verse 26 to 28. But what happened was that Adam and Eve gave up this right. So Leviticus 25, verse 23 to 25 in this week's Torah portion says, the land is not to be sold in perpetuity. So that means it's not sold forever. You're taking that title deed of the land only for a set period of time until the next Yovel. And then you need to give it back. Then it's redeemed. Then the person has worked back the debt because the land belongs to me. You are only foreigners and temporary residents with me. Therefore, when you sell your property, you must include the right of redemption. That is, if one of you becomes poor and sells some of his property, his next of kin can come and buy back what his relative sold. Isn't that awesome? Isn't that the story of the Redeemer, our Messiah? Isn't that exactly what he did? We were indebted through sin, and we gave up the title deed of dominion that God gave to us. And he comes as our next of kin, as our kinsman redeemer, because we are also sons of God. We are part of his family. And he says, you know what? I'll pay the price because you're going to work forever and you'll never pay off this debt. Galatians 4, verse 4 to 7 says, But when, in God's plan, the proper time had fully come, God sent his son, born of a woman, born under the regulations of the law, so that he might redeem and liberate those who were under the law, that we who believe might be adopted as sons, as God's children, with all rights as fully grown members of a family. And because you really are his sons, God sent the Spirit of his Son into our hearts, crying out, Abba, Father. Therefore, you are no longer a slave, a bondservant, but a son. And if a son, then also an heir through the gracious act of God through Christ. So what we see here is that it's really commentary in the New Testament on this exact part of the Torah that we studied this week. We see here that God's law stands. It stands for the enemy and it stands for us. And God said that you can sell the dominion, you can give away the title deed that I've given you to your life, which is also a land because you were made from the earth. But I reserve the right of redemption on you because you are my child. So I have the right to pay the price and to redeem back what you have sold through sin. Isn't that awesome? I've never looked at this and saw that through the eyes of the 50-year Yovel. So Hebrews 9 verse 15 says it is because of this death that he is the mediator of the new covenant or will. So that means someone died and there's an inheritance. That is the new covenant. It's our inheritance in Messiah. He died, he paid the price so that we can come back into our promised land, take back our dominion, take back the title deeds to our promised land, which is our bodies. Because a death has occurred which sets people free from the transgressions committed under the first covenant, those who have been called may receive the promised eternal inheritance. So like I said, even Satan needs to submit under God's law. And if God's law says you can make a trade with someone else, you can sell what is precious and you can sell what is your inheritance for something, but it's not forever. I retain the right of the redemption. So I have the right to redeem what you have sold or traded at any time. Luke 23 verse 42 to 43, and he was saying, Jesus, please remember me when you come into your kingdom. Jesus said to him, I assure you and most solemnly say to you, today you will be with me in paradise. Where was Adam and Eve when it all went wrong? What did they give up? What was their inheritance? It was paradise. They were in the Garden of Eden. They had the title deed to that place of intimacy, that first Mishkan, the first tabernacle, the first house of God, where God planted this garden and he placed Adam in it and he walked with Adam daily. That is what they gave up. That is what they sold. But Jesus says to the sinner next to him, today you will be back in that place that you gave up through your own sin and that you traded to Satan for sin. I'm going to redeem it and pay the price. I'm going to put you back into your God-given inheritance, and that is paradise. So where did we trade it? When we exchanged the fruit. That was the trade. The trade was, I'm going to take the fruit and you get the title deed. And that's the exchange that God is saying, yes, that is what the law says. But because of the right of redemption, I can reverse this. So not only did he redeem us, but he also redeemed the covenant. And he also took back our inherited land. John 14, verse 2 to 3 says, "In my Father's house are many dwelling places. If it were not so, I would have told you, because I'm going there to prepare a place for you. And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come back again, and I will take you to myself, so that where I am, you may be also." Where is the Father's house? The Father's house is the Mishkan. It's the tabernacle. Later on, it was the Mikdash, the temple. What do we see happens in the millennial reign? It's the new temple coming down from heaven and settling over Jerusalem. So I think this is one of the places where there's a lot of doctrine that confuses people, because even Jesus said to the sinner next to him, not, "I'm going to see you in heaven." He said, "I'm going to see you in paradise." And if he says, "I'm going to my Father's house to prepare a place for you," and we know the Father's house is the tabernacle, and the first tabernacle was Eden, where is Jesus or Yeshua preparing a place for us? It's in Eden. So I really tried very hard to find places in the Bible that says that we're going back to heaven, but we were never in heaven. We were on earth, placed on the earth by God. He created the earth for us. It says in the word that the earth and the heavens are renewed, and he comes down to earth to dwell with us. So we're going back to the beginning. It's our Yovel. We're going back to our original place, our inheritance. We're taking our land back that was sold. John 3 verse 13 says, "No one has gone up into heaven, but there is one who came down from heaven, the Son of Man himself, whose home is in heaven." So Yeshua is from heaven, but it says no one has gone up to heaven. He's preparing a place for us in that original paradise where God placed us, that we sold through sin. Revelation 21 verse 1 to 4. "Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth. For the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and there is no longer any sea. And I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, arrayed like a bride adorned for her husband. And then I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, 'See, the tabernacle of God is among men, and he will live among them, and they will be his people, and God himself will be with them. And he will wipe away every tear from their eyes, and there will no longer be death. There will no longer be sorrow and anguish or crying or pain, for the former order of things has passed away.'" You know what? Growing up, I would often hear conversations like, "Oh, I wonder what food's going to be like in heaven," or, "Oh, imagine all of those streets of gold, and imagine the mansions that the Lord is building for us in heaven." Those are all such soulish things that a human would think up, but clearly we see at the end of the book, God comes down and lives with us. And that's the pattern that we see all through the Bible. We see it in Eden. He put them in Eden, and then he walked with him there. Then he commanded Moses to build the tabernacle in the wilderness, and that's where he met, because he said, "I want to dwell among my people." All through the Bible, with the other tabernacle in Shiloh, with the temples, and with what we see in the millennial reign, we see God says, "I want to come down, create a space for me where there is purity and holiness, so that I can walk amongst my people." And for me, that fits in so well with this week's Torah portion and the message of the redemption of your promised land, the message of, I'm taking you back to a place that was so precious, that was your inheritance, that was sold. And I paid the price so that you can go back to your inheritance. So let's look at new beginnings. We've got the 7 days that we have in a week, but then every week after the 7th day, it's actually the 8th day, right? That 8th day is the first day of the new cycle of the week. And then we've got the 7 years till we have the Shemitah, which is the yearly Shabbat. And then we've got the 7 times 7s. And then in the 50th year, we've got the Yovel. So we see the same principle playing off with the 7 and the 8, the 7 times 7 and the 50. the 50 and the 8 always represents that new beginning, that first day to a new cycle, to a reset. And then we also see the same pattern with the 6,000 years of the Messianic reign. And then we've got the 7th year, that is when Messiah comes. So, sorry, it's the 6,000 years that we are on earth, the 7th year millennial reign of Messiah. And then the Bible speaks of the Olam Haba, the world to come. That begins the 8th day, the 50th year, the Yovel, the reset, the new beginning. So if we look at the cycles of sevens, these 6 days that we work, and then we've got the 7th, and we are prophetically living this every week, there's really 2 phases to these cycles. And even we can take that further with the 7 times 7 and the 50. What is the 2 phases? We've got the mundane that is then followed by the holy. So we see there's a place for both of these things in our lives. There's the 6 days where we are busy with the mundane, where we are working our field, we're working in our businesses, but then we have the 7th day that's holy, that's set apart, where we go into a time of rest. So holy or kadosh means to be removed, to be set apart. Shabbat, the word itself, means cessation. So in other words, to stop. That's when we stop doing all the things that are normal, that are mundane. That's the only way that we can set the Shabbat apart, is by not doing what we would usually do. The Shemitah means suspension. That also means to stop something. So out of all of this, what is the message that the Torah is conveying? Is that for us to enter into that place of holiness, we need to disengage from the material. If we're going to stay engaged with material things on the Shabbat, doing those normal things that you would normally do, those things that are connecting you to this world and to soulish desires, or maybe even driven by fear, that means that you are not setting the Shabbat aside and you cannot connect with the holy because you're still engaged with the material. The 8th day, and by implication then the 50th year as well, is directly related to the covenant, because that is also the day that we see that a young boy is circumcised and that he is given a name. Even Yeshua was circumcised on the 8th day. In Luke, it clearly says that his mom only gave him his name on the 8th day after he was circumcised. So that's really true identity that you're coming into. And there's a thing about the 8th day where the rabbis say there's a higher nature to the 8th. It's above human understanding. 7 is still something where we can understand it because there's this mix between matter and spirit. We've got the holy and the mundane. Like we said, we work for 6 days and then we set 1 day apart. But the 8th and the 50 is something totally different. It's something beyond nature. It's something that we cannot define. We don't have the understanding. It is transcendence. There's no limit. That's why it is the age to come. It's the forever. So the circumcision on the 8th day binds man and God through covenant. And this is going to be very important. You'll see when we finish now how all of this comes together. But we also know that there's more than just that physical cutting away of the flesh, that physical circumcision that a male child goes through on the 8th day. God says, I circumcise your heart. Where did we find this Ark of the Covenant? We found it in the Holy of Holies, in the most holy place of the dwelling place of God amongst man. And what was inside it? It was the covenant. It was the 2 stones of tablet with God's commandments on them. So God says, I'm going to put my word on your heart and I am going to circumcise your heart. So there's something with the cutting away, the letting go of the mundane and the material, and then ascending up onto the mountain of the Lord, and going into the spiritual, connecting with the holy. But the only way we can do that is through that cutting away of the mundane and the fleshly. We also see this 8th day is when the tabernacle was incorporated. So for 7 days it was prepared. For me, if God says we are his tabernacle, it kind of mirrors our lives as well. So we're playing this out every week, but we also see it in the 6,000 years of man, the 7,000 year where Messiah will reign, and then on the 8th day, that inauguration of that permanent dwelling with God. We have that reiterated with the 7 days of Sukkot, and then on the 8th day, there's the Shabbat, and again, the 7 times 7 counting of the Omer, which is the same as the Yovel year, the 7 times 70, 7 times 7 of Shemitah years. So what this signifies is to be free from the material. The Jubilee year represents a state of true freedom. One might think the Jubilee sounds really scary because now I need to give up all the security that I had, everything that I've accumulated for myself. I need to give it up now. So that's one way to look at it. But another way to look at it could be, now I'm truly free. There's nothing holding me bound to this earth, bound to the material. Now I am 100% reliant on God. And God actually gives a beautiful promise with the Yovel. For 3 years, you eat of that final harvest. Only in the 4th year do you start eating the new one. So God's provision is so bountiful if we are obedient in letting down, setting down those things that are material and of this world. It signifies to us freedom from the restraints of those things that are material in our lives. So I want to finish off with tying all of this together if we look at God's name. God's name is spelled Yod Hey Vav Hey. And if we look at that, we'll see that there's a picture for us in the name of God. God says, I created you in my image. And if we understand the Hebrew letters, we'll know that there are certain Hebrew letters that specifically denote the male and others the female. So Yod is a male letter, and Hey, whenever you put a Hey at the end of a word, it makes it female. If you think of all or most of the female names in the Bible, Sarah, Deborah, Rebecca, that Hey at the end makes it female. So we see even in God's attributes, we know there are certain parts of his attributes where he will describe himself like a mother, El Shaddai. We know that there's certain attributes of the Holy Spirit. The Ruach HaKodesh is always female. So we know that in God, there's these characteristics of the male and the female. And if we look to the left, we've got the Vav and the Hey. And the Vav is also a male, a letter that denotes man because it's the number 6, and 6 is the number of man. But we see Hey again, which is the female. So we are made in the image of God. We need to mirror the image of God. But there's one problem with this. If we take what is on the left and we had to put it on top of what is on the right, the 2 Heys would fit perfectly. But do you see that the 2 male letters, the one is longer, the Vav is an extended Yod? And what the rabbis say is that that Vav means that you are pegged into the earth. You are connected to the earth and to what is earthly and material. But what does God want us to do? How do we truly become the image of God? It is when we circumcise the Vav, when we cut away that which is holding us down to this earth, to the material, to this world. That is the only time that we can truly transform ourselves into the image of God. So some things to think about as we finish this Torah portion is, what are you willing to give up, to let go of? What are the material or worldly things that you are holding on to? Because if you're not willing to give up that, if that circumcision of letting go of pulling up your tent pegs and saying, I'm not so attached to the material that I will not honor the Shabbat. I'm not so attached to the material that I won't honor your feasts. I'm going to trust you, even if human reasoning it doesn't make sense. I'm going to let go of the worldly and the material, because that is going to allow you to transcend into true intimacy with the Father. What is holding you in place, pegged into this earth, that is hampering your spiritual growth? And what tomorrow are you focused on? So often we lay awake at night and we worry about things that are ahead, things that we need to do or need to prepare for, things that we plan for or that we don't have control over. And we're lying awake about tomorrows that are mundane. But how often do we lie awake at night and think about our forever tomorrow? What am I doing today that is going to affect my forever tomorrow? That 8th day, that 50th year, that new reset and new beginning. Where are you going to be then based on the decisions that you are making right now? Shabbat Shalom.